faster than a lot of the pursuit aircraft at the time, so the pursuit aircraft couldn't keep up with it. Okay, so we're getting into the late 1930s. Germany is invading Europe. Japan has invaded China. The Army expects that we'll eventually go to war, and we're going to need lots of pilots, but they didn't have the training facilities to train lots of pilots, so they set up a program with civilian schools and universities and flying schools to train lots of pilots that they could later draft into the Army when they needed them. So that program was basically broken up into 3 stages. The first stage was primary training, and they would use what were called primary trainers or PT aircraft. So the PT aircraft are these 2 that are hanging up with the yellow wings. Those are typical of the PT aircraft. Very simple, straightforward airplane. All they want to do is train the pilots to take off, control the airplane, and land. Just to basically be able to control the airplane. If they could do that, then they would go on to basic training. Basic training, they use a more advanced airplane. This is a BT or basic training aircraft. It's more advanced, bigger engine, faster, more maneuverable, had full instrumentation so they could teach the students to fly cross country, fly from point A to point B without getting lost, take off and land at night and in weather conditions, blind flying. They would learn how to fly formation, how to do some aerobatic maneuvers, those type of things. Once they completed basic training, then they would be split off either to become pursuit pilots or heavy pilots. Heavy pilots being cargo or bomber pilots, so multi-engine pilots. And that would be advanced training. They would go to advanced training or AT aircraft. The AT-6 was the advanced trainer for the pursuit pilots, the fighter pilots. The AT-6 that we have in the museum is in the second building in the Korean War section. So we get to the Korean War section, look for the AT-6, and that's what was used for training the fighter pilots in World War II. The other pilots were trained in twin-engine AT aircraft, and I'll show you those in the next building. Now, the last plane I'm going to show you in this section is the Hawker Hurricane. Now, the Hawker Hurricane was one of the top British fighters during the Battle of Britain, 1940. Of course, Britain was the only country in Europe that hadn't been invaded by the Germans. Germans were trying to bomb them into submission. So they were sending waves of bomber formations escorted by their Messerschmitt fighters. And the British were defending themselves with the Hawker Hurricane and also the Spitfire. Now, the Spitfire was a much newer airplane. It was a better airplane than the Hawker Hurricane, but it was just starting to come off the production line, so the British didn't have very many of those. They had quite a few of they had more of the Hawker Hurricanes. The Hawker Hurricane came out just a couple years later than that pea shooter, but it's a much more advanced airplane than the pea shooter. You notice it has retractable landing gear, it has the cantilever wing, has no external support, so it just has the cantilever wing for much more streamlined. It has a bigger, more powerful liquid-cooled V12 engine. It has an enclosed cockpit. It now has the guns firing in the wings. So it has guns in the wings. You notice those red patches, though? Those are the gun ports. They were operating on dirt fields and were worried that mud and dirt would be flung up on takeoff and clog the gun ports, so they would put tape over them. First, as soon as they got into combat, the first bullet through there would punch a hole through the tape. No problem. Then they come back and land and put new tape on it to keep the dirt out. Yes?
Was the Hurricane one the first of the variable pitch propeller? Because the pea shooter was there with fixed pitch.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was the first. Yeah. It was around that time they were experimenting with the during the Battle of Britain, the Hawker Hurricane wasn't quite as good as the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the top German fighter that was escorting the bombers. So what the British did was they sent their Spitfires to engage the Messerschmitts, and the Hawker Hurricanes would take on the bombers in the formation. So that way they were better managed. Now, we have this here because of the Eagle Squadron. Now, during World War II, at the beginning of World War II, during the Battle of Britain, America was still neutral. We weren't involved in the war yet, but there were American volunteers who wanted to fly for the Royal Air Force. They were formed into Eagle Squadrons, squadrons that were just all American volunteers. They were all. Now, the last thing I want to point out about this Hawker Hurricane, if you come around here and look at the rear fuselage, right behind the cockpit, you see that section where it has XRB? That section is still fabric covered. It has metal, aluminum tubing inside for the internal structure, but the skin is still fabric and then covered with dope, just to reduce the weight of the aircraft. The rest of it's aluminum skin, but that part is still fabric covered. And when you go through, as we go through World War II, if you look closely at the control surfaces, the rudder, the elevator, and the ailerons, those control surfaces will still very often be fabric covered, just to reduce the weight of those moving surfaces. So if you look close, you'll see a lot of those are fabric covered. Okay, so we're going through now. Through here, 6 million Jews were killed in the concentration camps. The Nazis also killed about 5 million other people they didn't like. There were a lot of groups that they didn't like. So they were killing, exterminating a lot of people. But this is dedicated to the Holocaust. This wall here talks about people who ended up in the Dayton area who had some kind of involvement in the Holocaust. So some of them were soldiers, American soldiers who liberated the concentration camps, who either came from Dayton or settled in Dayton afterwards. Some of them were survivors of the